Burlesque Stripped Down, episode number 14. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and very Merry Christmas to those of you who do celebrate. This episode is going live on Christmas Eve, so I hope that you are having a wonderful time with your family, with your friends, and that you are just really enjoying the season. Whether or not you celebrate, it can be a very festive season. I know here in the States, I'm not sure how it's been around the world, but we've had an unseasonably warm, even here in Florida, of course, it's always warm, but I know up north it's been a little bit warm. Not everybody's getting the white Christmas they hope for, but I really hope that you are really having a wonderful holiday season, a wonderful time maybe off of work, or if you're working, you're still enjoying that and not getting too crazy out there on the roads and in the stores. Once again, by the way, this is Velvet Eau Claire. I forgot to say that in the beginning. This is Velvet Eau Claire. I am your host, your guide through all of the saucy and sexy secrets for us, the ladies and gents behind the tassels. And this is Burlesque Stripped Down. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you so much. The fact that you're here today, you've pressed play. I know some of you have been sharing it, over on Twitter and Instagram and on Facebook, of course. And I really, really appreciate that. We're kind of slowly climbing with our listen numbers, so the more we can, that would be great. I have some goals for here 2016, and I would love and I really appreciate your work to help me hit those. We are smack dab in the middle of Authenticity Month, and really the interviews and the episodes that I've done have really been more than I could have hoped for. I think they just really have been resonating with me and helping me a lot, and I hope that they're having a similar effect with you. Last week, we talked a little bit about creating a personal brand and really developing that persona as a burlesque performer. And so I hope some of that was useful for you as well. And then on Monday, we talked a bit with two of the Distress dolls. We had Coquette Rouge and Ali Boubois on. And so I really love that I've had the chance to talk with both of those girls, as well as Ruby Jones and and everyone else, basically this entire month, because I think a lot of things that they had to say really go in well with a lot of the things we're talking about here with authenticity. And so I'm so thankful that they were able to be guests during this month, because it really just timing worked out really well, because I think that they fit in just perfectly. So today we're going to talk a little bit about vulnerability and confidence, and kind of how they interact and why they're so important for us as performers. And I want to talk mostly kind of about some, a bit last month, towards the beginning, we talked about some mindset shifts for treating your burlesque career as a business. And I kind of like that term, mindset shift, because they're not really realizations, because we may already know them, but they're ways that we just need to really internalize, some things that we need to really, really realize and shift the way our mind thinks about them. And it takes time. It's why I can't call them really realizations, because a realization implies a one-off thing. You realize it and then you're done. These are more kind of longer term, more work that we need to do with those. So anyway, I have 4 different mindset shifts, 4 different things that we need to understand and really internalize about vulnerability and its relationship with confidence, particularly as performers. And then I have 3 kind of tips on 3 kind of steps, maybe things to do to help you get to that point. So let's go ahead and get started talking about vulnerability. Now, this is a really tough topic for me to talk about, because vulnerability is not something that I do well with. It is, I have always thought of myself as a very strong person. And so in my mind, strength was related with being not too vulnerable to maybe some of my good friends and intimate relationships, perhaps. But I do not like people to think of me as a vulnerable person. I do not like people to think that I don't know what I'm doing. And so this has been a very, very personal struggle for me. And I'm going to share with you a few short, of my stories, as well as some resources that have really helped me as well. Of course, you'll be able to find all of the links that I mentioned in this episode, as well as some tweetable quotes over in the show notes for this episode, which will be at burlesquestrippeddown.com/vulnerability. So the first kind of mindset shift or realization thing to internalize, number 1, is that vulnerability is not being weak. Vulnerability is not weakness. And this is probably, I like to start with this one because this is my biggest challenge. It's only recently that I've realized that the word vulnerability is not a synonym for being weak. In my head growing up, I mean, I always thought it was. I thought I don't want to be vulnerable. I mean, that to me, it had a negative connotation. It meant that you don't know what you're doing and that people can hurt you and that you're not strong enough. And, regardless of kind of where that came from, my environment growing up, kind of some things that happened to me, I had to be a very strong person. We had a bit of a very bad family situation that happened to us, when I was 14. And so that I had to take a lot of strength on with that. I felt compelled. No one made me, but I felt compelled that I needed to be the strong one in the situation. And so I think that had a lot to do with how I've developed as someone who kind of equates vulnerability with not being strong and with people thinking less of me. And so it really takes a while to really internalize that vulnerability is not equated with weakness. It is not the same thing. In fact, vulnerability is a bit of strength, right? There's an inherent kind of a courage in being vulnerable, especially as a performer. I mean, all of these things are going to be true for us as human beings, but particularly as a performer. A lot of us can go up there and bullshit our way through a 4-minute number, pretending to be so confident, pretending that we have all this courage and we're not vulnerable at all. In fact, I think it's more courageous almost to go up there and to really connect in an authentic, vulnerable way with the people that we're in front of. And the same way, on a personal level with our interpersonal relationships, it takes more courage to be able to connect with someone really authentically, all walls down. And it's hard. It's not easy to do. Of course, as burlesque performers, we do have a certain affinity already with vulnerability because we do tend to strip on stage or be almost naked on stage and things like that, which inherently, of course, makes us a little bit more vulnerable. So we do have a relationship with vulnerability already. But I think still we often put up a facade. We often put up a face. Even if we're almost butt naked on stage, we still have these walls. We still aren't completely authentic or vulnerable. I also, in researching a little bit for this podcast episode, I came across an article by a woman named Andrea Ayers over on crew.co, and I'll link that up in the show notes page. And she kind of starts out talking about that story, The Little Engine That Could. And maybe, I'm not sure if it was an international popular story. I know here in the States, a lot of us of our generation probably know it, about this really confident engine that said, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. And while that is a great and uplifting story, Andrea, the author, she mentions that there were oceans between the way that train felt and how she felt. And in fact, the engine's positive attitude, basically, she says, annoyed the living daylights out of her. Who was that engine to know so surely, so 100% that they could do that thing? And why don't I feel like that? And I think that's something a lot of us go through. We see this self-doubt creeping in. And because it's not what everybody else is feeling, there must be something wrong with us. It must be a weakness that we have because everybody else seems to be so fucking sure of what they're doing. So it must be something wrong. And so I think that while it's good, and I think we do this a lot, particularly in America, tell our kids they can do anything and they can be anything. And this is something that I've spoken a lot on a personal level, as I grow up, as I'm about to enter my 30s and I'm realizing more about the world and how it works. We tell our children they can do anything, but then that comes to a bit of a letdown when they realize that maybe they're not going to do anything or that maybe they don't want to, or that maybe they don't have that self-confidence that everyone else has and that they should have. So to me, this all kind of then boils down to the fact that we think of it as a weakness. We think of the fact that we have this self-doubt, that we are a little bit vulnerable as a weakness, and so then we want to cover it up and never ever show it to anybody. Me, personally, whenever I feel embarrassed, if someone calls me out on something, I react and I'm a total bitch. And anyone who knows me personally, if you're listening to this episode and you're a friend of mine or you're a person, you've probably seen me do this, right? I feel like I'm being attacked. I feel like I've done something wrong. And so I react by attacking back. And that all comes from this inherent fear of being vulnerable, of being seen as not perfect. And that's something I'm going to get to in the next point as well. But anyway, so to me, this is the number one realization. Again, not just realization. We don't want to just understand it at an intellectual level, but to really, really internalize deep down. And it is something that I am still struggling with every single day. This is something that I'm dealing with. And I'll get to kind of how I work on dealing with this a little bit later. So that's number one as far as these mindset shifts, is that vulnerability is not equated with weakness. Mindset shift number 2, perfection is an unreasonable goal. Now, this is a perfect example of one of those that we can't just call a realization. I think we've all heard that. We all know on an intellectual brain level. Yeah, we know that nobody's perfect. We know, it's an unreasonable goal. I'm never going to be perfect. But the way our society works, our society still absolutely views perfection as a reasonable goal to attain. Why is that? Why the fuck does our society still make us believe internally, again, not at that brain level, but down in our hearts, it still makes us believe like perfection is something that we could attain? And it's simply not. I mean, we may say that we know that perfection is not reasonable, but you take one look at any women's magazines or pretty much any television commercial that ever comes on TV ever, almost. And all we see is perfection all the way around us. It's happened. This is something that Ruby Jones and I talked about a couple weeks ago as well. We see this all over on the social media. Also, we see these perfect lives and these perfect things because people want to put that best foot forward, right? And so that just internalizes the fact that if our lives are not perfect, there must be something wrong with us. I know some people argue that it can be a good thing because it pushes us to go farther than we thought was possible. But we need to look for performing well or doing our job or our duties or our goals well without striving for perfection. So that's our mindset shift number 2, is really, really internalizing the fact that perfection is an unreasonable goal. Not one single person in this whole goddamn world is perfect. Not one. And there's no such thing as perfection. Anything that you see that looks perfect is completely an illusion. 100%. And so to really not just know that on an intellectual level, but to really, really internalize it. That's our second goal there. Mindset shift number 3 is the fact that there is really no such thing as failure. Not one. Failure does not exist. Does not exist. You may think that something that you've done did not meet the exact expectations that you had set for it. And you may consider that a failure. But at the risk of getting a little bit more philosophical here, everything happens for a reason. We all know. Again, there's all these cliches that we've heard a million times, but we never really, 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 really internalize them, or at least not right away, usually. We've heard them. Everything happens for a reason, but look deep down in your life and go back 5-10 years and think about something that you considered a huge failure in your life. And I almost guarantee you 98% of the time, something good came of it. And it created where you are today. It created the person you are today. And again, I know this sounds so cliche, but really internalize it. This is something that we really need to shift those mindsets on, because we can tell it to each other all day long, but until we internalize it, it won't happen. Now, this internalization number 4, I had to think really hard about exactly how I wanted to say this. We talk about a lot about vulnerability in general, but my title of this episode is Vulnerability and Confidence. And so I wanted to include confidence in here. And it's a tough thing to deal with because, of course, confidence has that great connotation. We all want to be confident, especially self-confident. We want to feel good about ourselves and project this image that we know what we're doing. But I think the way I'd like to say number 4 here is that confidence is a result, not a method. Confidence is a result and not a method. Confidence is what happens when you maybe are vulnerable, when you do this. It's what other people perceive of you, but it's not how you get there. And granted, there's a small bit of, fake it till you make it kind of thing, right? And we have to, especially as burlesque performers, we have to project kind of an air of confidence. And we don't want to be completely unconfident in ourselves all the time. But if we can imagine it more as a result of the way we present ourselves instead of how we present ourselves, I think that really helps. There's a fabulous quote by an author, I think he's an Australian author named Robert Hughes. And I found this again in that same article I mentioned earlier, from Miss Ayres, Andrea Ayres on crew.co. And he says, the greater the artist, the greater the doubt. Perfect confidence is granted to the less talented as a consolation prize. And I just love that. I think that's so funny, right? So the less talented get this awesome confidence, because they don't have the talent. So they get a little consolation prize and get the confidence instead. But I think, and we talked about this a huge amount back at the beginning of this month when we talked about the imposter syndrome. And so taking that, all of the things that we learned about the imposter syndrome and about feeling like we're not good enough, and taking that little bit of faking it until we make it, but taking that mindset shift. I'm not necessarily talking about changing the way you do things, but again, this is the way we think about things. Think about your confidence as coming as a result of what you're doing, of the way you're presenting yourself, instead of as how you're presenting yourself. I don't want to necessarily present myself as a confident person. I want to present myself as an authentic person, a person who's true to myself, a person who's vulnerable, who's friendly, who's all of these things. And I think as you get more authentic and as you get more true to yourself, then the result will be that you come across as more confident. I hope that makes sense. Like I said, I kind of debated exactly how I wanted to word that, but I think that really encompasses what I want to say, is that confidence is the end result, how things are in the end, but should not be kind of your goal as you go along, right? Not your method, not your means of doing it. So for me, and again, these are all, of course, my personal opinions, things that I've gleaned over a lot of self-reflection, a lot of reading, and a lot of listening to other people. Those are 4 big mindset shifts that we need to have in order to present ourselves in life and in performance as truly authentic, vulnerable, and yet confident people. Number 1, vulnerability is not weakness. Number 2, perfection is an unreasonable goal. Number 3, there's no such thing as failure. And number 4, confidence is a result and not a method. And so, as we're trying to kind of redefine these mindsets, the big question, of course, becomes how. And as I continue, I'm going to be referencing a woman named Brené Brown. And if you've not heard of Brené Brown, I cannot recommend enough. If you don't go to any other show notes page, if you don't click on any other links from any episode I ever do in my entire life, go to this one and click on her link, just maybe to her website. I'm not even sure what I'm going to link up because everything that I see that she ever does is gold. She did recently a TED Talk, and I think it's one of the most viewed TED Talks in the history of TED Talks, because she has studied being vulnerable. She has studied shame. She's studied confidence. She's studied all these things from a very scientific perspective, but she also talks about her experiences from it. And I cannot recommend it enough. So I'm going to be referencing a few things that she has said in various talks and interviews today. And I highly, highly recommend that you check her out in further detail as you're working on becoming a more authentic person, because she is wonderful. So I like the way that she puts the big question, right? What she says is basically, how do we learn to embrace our vulnerabilities and imperfections so that we can engage our lives from a place of authenticity and worthiness? And I mean, she even uses my word, authenticity. So to me, that encompasses it. And that's the big question, isn't it? How do we learn to embrace these things, our vulnerabilities and our imperfections? I hate the way that I react to embarrassment by being bitchy. I hate that about myself. So how do I learn to embrace that so that I can live as a truly authentic person and perform as a truly authentic burlesque performer and podcaster? No, that's the big question. And for me, there's 3 main steps that I'm working on to get there. Step number 1 is to be aware. Simply by listening to this podcast episode, I think you've made maybe your first step, or maybe a further step. Maybe you were already aware of this. For me, I don't know if there was a specific moment. I can't remember any specific moment where the light switch kind of went on. But prior to maybe my mid-20s, I didn't even know this was a problem. Again, I thought of vulnerability as a bad thing. And so I just didn't even equate the fact that to improve my confidence, to really connect with people, to be authentic, I needed to get more vulnerable. I thought I was fine the way I was. And so the first time that you really become aware, I mean, to me, that's the first step. That's the first big thing that happens and that can change your life. Once you've done that, I recommend just getting out there and just reading, becoming more aware of this. Go to Brene Brown. She's a great starting point. She has a lot of great resources, right? Read things, listen to podcast episodes, listen to videos, listen to interviews, TED Talks, all of those things. Search on the internet. What does it mean to be vulnerable, especially as a performer? What does that mean? How do we do that? Discuss it with people, right? Especially if you have a group of people, maybe other performers that you really trust and resonate with, get together over coffee and have the one topic of conversation be vulnerability. You can share stories that make you really feel really vulnerable. If you meditate, these are great. Those 4 realizations I gave, those are great things to just kind of have a meditation session on, right? And just really dig deep inside of you and figure out how you approach these things on your personal basis from your past and all of that. If you go to a therapist, talk about it with your therapist or with your significant other or with your dog. I don't care, right? Just get it out there and get talking about it, get thinking about it, and get more aware of it and see where your boundaries lie. It's only through being aware of it that I've seen these huge walls I've put up in my life. I always thought I was an authentic person. I thought I was true. And I was to an extent. But this fear of vulnerability and this fear of failure has been just something that has just awoken me, I guess. Just the realization that it was there and the work that I'm doing with it is changing my life completely. So that's number 1, is just to be aware and continually learning about it. Number 2, and we talked about this a lot on Monday with the Distress Dolls, about supporting each other. Support your fellow, especially performers, everyone else in your life. You support your fellow human being in their vulnerability, in their imperfections. Support them. Stop judging people. Stop thinking of them versus me. We are all a community together. Oh my gosh, I'm sounding so cliche, aren't I? But it's so true. We are all a community together, right? Being vulnerable improves our connections with other people. It does. And then by proxy, it improves the quality of our community, our burlesque community as a whole, and our human community as a whole. Women, humans, whatever. Because the thing is, vulnerability comes out of shame. A lot of it does. Not always, but a lot of cases of feeling vulnerable comes from this feeling of shame. And especially, of course, especially as women, and I apologize to any of my male listeners out there. I know you deal with it as well. But I think, as a woman, I can only speak for my experience and for what I've discussed with my fellow women. Shame is this horrible web of, why don't I just go to the expert? Brene Brown has a great quote, and I'm going to quote her about 5 times in the next 2 minutes. Shame for women is this web of unobtainable, conflicting, competing expectations about who we're supposed to be. And it's a straitjacket. And I think a lot of you women and men as well can really relate to that. It's a straitjacket, this feeling of shame. Oh my gosh. And I feel like I'm about to cry because it's so true. Think about all your life growing up. There was so much shame involved, I think, for most of you. If not, you may be lucky, or you may need to dig a little deeper and realize that you may be in a little bit of denial. It's possible. I'm not saying how it is. I know not everyone has the same experiences. But Brene Brown goes on to discuss how empathy is the complete antidote to shame. And I love what she says. The 2 most powerful words when we're in struggle are me too. Ugh. Let that sink in for a second. Whenever you've had a bad day or you're going through something that makes you feel ashamed or makes you feel vulnerable, how great does it feel to have someone else identify, not compete with you, not to say, oh, but my situation's worse, but just to say, oh, me too. I know how that feels. I'd go through that as well. And so empathy is what we need. And so that's why that's my second tip here. Once we are connecting with each other and we're empathizing and we're really accepting each other's vulnerabilities and imperfections, we can grow so much as human beings, as performers, as living things. Here's another quote from Brene, and this is a little bit longer, but I don't want to cut it down because it is perfect. She says, "If we're going to find our way back to each other, vulnerability is going to be that path. And I know it's seductive to stand outside the arena because I think I did it my whole life and think to myself, I'm going to go in there and kick some ass when I'm bulletproof and when I'm perfect. And that is seductive. But the truth is that that never happens. And even if you got as perfect as you could and as bulletproof as you could possibly muster when you got in there, that's not what we want to see. We want you to go in. We want to be with you and across from you. And we just want for ourselves and the people we care about and the people we work with to dare greatly." And I just think what she says is just so beautiful there. That's not what we want. Okay, I'm going to get a little geeky for a second, right? In a lot of science fiction, sometimes every now and then we see an artificial intelligence that is trying to play music or is trying to perform or do something artistic, right? I think a lot of, I'm a big Star Trek TNG person, and Data is an android, and he goes through this struggle of trying to paint and then to play the violin and these things, and his big problem is that he's playing it so perfectly. He's playing it perfectly. No one wants to hear a fucking perfect piece of music. I'm sorry, we don't. Maybe your teacher in band class in high school wanted to hear it perfectly, but no one wants perfection. We want authenticity. We want vulnerability. We want to hear that crack in your voice. We want to see you maybe give an extra little wink out into the audience that wasn't scripted, or even sometimes when you miss a step, right? We're not waiting there to laugh at you. We're waiting to see that realistic, that real person that's up on stage. Again, that empathy, that me too. Think back to the little engine that could. No one wants to see someone who is just like perfect and like never has any self-doubt about themselves. We don't relate to that. And so as burlesque performers on both sides of it, we need to think about empathy, and we need to think about that support of each other when we're in the audience and when we're performing. So that's step number 2 in this journey, supporting others from both sides of it. And step number 3 can be a little bit difficult, but I would love to see some of you make this commitment to take one risk every day. Starting today. Take one risk consciously, not just, I know some of you do take risks every day automatically, but make one conscious effort. Maybe get a calendar and mark it off with a red X every day. Jerry Seinfeld said that's the best way to do it, right? Because you don't want to break that chain. And commit yourself to taking one risk that makes you feel vulnerable every fucking day. And it can be something simple. It could be something like posting, a picture that's maybe a little less than flattering on Instagram. Oh my God. The other day I got a haircut and I literally took about 50 pictures trying to find one to post on Instagram. I'm ridiculous, So this is advice that I'm going to take for myself. Believe me, I am not lecturing you. This is a journey I am going through as well. So maybe it's posting a picture where you don't look as perfect as you might like, but that's okay. It's vulnerable. It's real. It's authentic. Maybe it's something a little bit bigger, like, talking to that hottie at the supermarket. You may be in your sweatpants. You may not look the greatest, but, you could talk to them a little bit. Risk that failure. Be vulnerable. Not with some cheesy pickup line, but with the real authentic you. And maybe it's a little bit bigger, like going on stage to perform a brand new number that you haven't done before in front of a brand new audience that you've never seen before and you don't know if anyone's going to root for you. That's, of course, a bigger one. So commit yourself to taking one risk every day. One thing that pulls you out of your comfort zone, makes you feel vulnerable, and then notice, take after a week, after 2 weeks, after a month. See how you feel. See if that result is more confidence. I'm willing to bet that it might be. So ladies and gentlemen, this has turned out much longer than I expected. I was hoping to do a quick episode since we've had a lot of long episodes this month, and since I know it is Christmas Eve if you're listening to this right away, and hopefully I'm not taking you away from your family too much, but I really appreciate you tuning in to listen. I hope that this helped a little bit. I wanted to share with you some of my stories and some of the stories of other people. And speaking of stories, actually, here's one last quote from Miss Brown, Brene Brown. She has a beautiful video on her website. Like I said, everything on her website's great. And the video is called The Manifesto of the Brave and Brokenhearted. And it's a short little video and it's just beautifully written, beautifully filmed. And she says, when we deny our stories, they define us. So I just want to leave you with that today. When we deny our stories, they define us. So embrace your story, embrace who you are, embrace your vulnerability, all of your imperfections. Get those fucking out there. Show the fucking world. We'll love to see it. I'll love to see it. Be vulnerable, be real, be authentic. And in the end, you'll be more confident that way. That's not your method, but that's your end result. So I hope this has done something for you today. I'm going to go ahead and sign off real quick. Please do keep in mind that on Monday, I'll be having the last interview of Authenticity Month with Miss Ariel Helvetica. And so she's going to join us for a little chat about being authentic as well. And then we're going to wrap up Authenticity Month next week on the 31st, on New Year's Eve, to wrap up the entire year, the first year, even though it's only a couple months, of Burlesque Stripped Down, with a kind of post wrapping all of this up called what I like to call You Do You. We're going to talk about just doing whatever the fuck you want, being true to yourself, and how to translate that into your burlesque career. As always, please do send me an email. Let me know, particularly with this episode, let me know what you thought. And either you can do it publicly on the comment section over on that show notes page, which is burlesquestrippeddown.com/vulnerability. Or you can send me an email directly if you'd like to keep the conversation private between us, velvet@burlesquestrippeddown.com. If you have a second, head over into iTunes and leave me a rating and review. Would be much appreciated, as I'm trying to get more visible over there. And until I talk to you next, I hope that you have a fabulous holiday week. And please remember to stay authentic, stay vulnerable, and in the end, you will automatically stay sexy.